Hello. How's everyone doing?
Good.
Good, great. I'm so excited to be moderating today. This is going to be my third time moderating. It's always a pleasure. But so just some information. I'm Olivia, and when you present, I will be timing for the single person presentations. You will have 15 minutes, and for group presentations, 20. So I will hold cards about when you have 5 minutes, 2 minutes, and 1 minute left. So I'll just be sitting right here, and I'll be timing that. And we are recording as well. We have this right here for your slides. And yeah, any questions before we get started?
Yes. For the comment and feedback, is that part of the QR code?
This is right here.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll remind you again after the presentation while we're switching.
Okay.
But yeah, thank you for reminding me.
Okay. I'm going to come up and see that.
Oh yeah, perfect. Yeah, just so it's open. Thank you. So presenting first, we have Cataly Din with Professor Aaron Skoda, and we will talk about the drastic overturn of the Native American diet. Can community-based education change it? By delving into Native American diet from an ancestral to present day, we can observe that educating the communities may actually improve dietary habits of certain communities. Awesome.
I'm doing drastic overturn of Native American diet, and hopefully by educating communities, specifically adolescents in Native American adolescents, we can actually curb and prevent health problems in the future. So before contact with American settlers, the ancestral diet consisted of nuts, seeds, and corn, wild fruits, nuts, small game, and oftentimes tribes would trade buffalo or different agriculture with each other, and the three columns, the three pedestals almost of their diet were considered corn, beans, and squash, and they're called the Three Sisters. In 1830, Andrew Jackson initiated the Indian Removal Act, and that was triggered by the Louisiana Purchase in 1803, and that encouraged settlers to move west into California, Arizona, that area. And so because of this, more than 100,000 Native Americans were removed from east of the Mississippi River to Oklahoma. In 1864, crops of the Navajo people were burned to the ground, which means they had no resources at all available that they were used to. So all of their crops, just corn, beans, or whatever they could find. And the Long Walk of Navajo actually moved them to travel to New Mexico, where majority of them passed away because of this treacherous walk. And 5 major tribes had also moved to Oklahoma on the Trail of Tears, where the majority of them had passed away also. And so because of this, they were forced onto reservations to make room for Western settlers, and typically they depended on government rations, which included Spam, lard, wheat flour, instant coffee, and sugar. And these are not necessarily known for their nutritional content. For example, Spam actually was created in World War II because it was high in fats and sodium and was able to last a long time. And it was really cheap because it was made with the meats that people typically didn't use or were considered unusable. And so in just one serving of Spam, about 2 ounces, it contains 30% of your saturated fat content of the day, and 40 milligrams of cholesterol and 790 milligrams, which is 34% of your daily recommended intake of sodium. And because of this, the health and poverty in Native American communities were greatly affected because they were so compacted on these reservations that Native Americans now actually hold the #1 spot with the fewest full-time employed individuals. And 25.9%, so almost 26%, which is more than a quarter of indigenous individuals are below the poverty line right now, and they also are the #1 group of people that are below the poverty line. And based on the 2020 census, the OMH stated that 30% of Native adolescents are more likely to be obese as compared to their non-Hispanic Caucasian peers, and adults are even higher with 50% chance more likely to be obese or overweight. And this causes a higher prevalence of diabetes, liver disease, and heart disease, along with other weight-related issues. However, in 2014, according to the National Library of Medicine, there was a study done where lessons twice a week with the whole family and cooking demonstrations, also other nutrition-based lessons were included and aided, and later on showed that there were drastic results in improving their health and their knowledge in creating healthier meals. In 2018, a student at the University of Minnesota volunteered at an after-school program and had her students take the Young Healthy Eating Survey before and after. Students with the after-school program joined 5 weekly sessions, and this included cooking classes, also classes to teach them about like healthier eating, where they can access these certain foods, or just nutrition-based education in general. And so the students retook the survey, and on average, they scored an additional 5 points on this survey later on, which is incredibly drastic. I think it was about 40 points that they scored after, as compared to a 35 on average. And so some organizations that support Native American nutrition education include Department of Indian Work, the DIW, the FDPIR, which is the Food Distribution Program on Indian Reservations, Farm to School, which also in Native American communities bases their encourages students to grow their own food on campus and have them cook it and learn about their ancestral diet and just like the Three Sisters. And also the IHS, which is the Indian Health Service, and also later on, if many programs around the country can also fund these in community centers, Boys and Girls Club, and even like schools can actually do that. Yeah, that's it.
Awesome. So now we will begin the 5-minute Q&A portion. So if anyone has any questions, yeah, feel free to ask.
I have 2 questions.
Yes.
One of them, do you know where the term Three Sisters came from?
Three Sisters is actually based on their religion and their beliefs. And so they thought that they were almost like goddesses. I believe that they were a more religious presence, and it's just more of a religious basis.
And then my other question is, you're talking about like a survey that they did in Minnesota, I think it was,
Yeah.
About the points. Like I didn't really understand.
So the survey basically kind of asked about where they can access these foods, if they knew how to make certain foods, if they understood like what they were eating and what they can do to be better, and just in general, like if their score shows that they can actually improve their health and their families.
Do you know of any local programs that you can like volunteer for to help educate and?
Not exactly Native Americans in California, but I do volunteer at the Boys and Girls Club in Solana Beach, and it does focus on like a Mexican population and it's an after-school program for students, and they're on the lower socioeconomic side, so you can actually help them. They're really cute. So, yeah.
Thank you.
So how did this project help you with your major and your studies?
I want to focus on community nutrition in impoverished areas and in areas where there may not be access to healthier foods. And so just by educating and learning, actually me learning about this helps too. So.
What's your major?
I'm nutrition doctor.
Oh, okay. Do you have a favorite dish yourself?
Like just in general?
Yeah.
I've been really craving avocado toast. So.
Good seasoning,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
I have another question. Actually. Have you, since this is about Native Americans, have you visited any of the reservations in San Diego?
No, I did not. I did talk to a lot of my friends who are Native American. I actually FaceTimed their families. I was like, hey, I have some questions for you guys. So I did get a little bit inside the box. I don't know much more than like if I were to visit a reservation and really delve into it.
So, great research.
Do you think that like more nutrition education would be helpful in elementary schools, middle schools?
I think if you start kids young, because they really like to like watch what their parents are doing and kind of like add in their own opinions. They're very opinionated, but if they're learning about nutrition, they can ask their parents like, hey, I learned about so and so told me about this in school. Could we possibly try to make it or like find out where to get it?
And possibly learning how to grow things on their own too.
Is there a cooking class at the Boys and Girls School?
Yeah, there is. There's one at Encinitas and one in Solana Beach.
How cool.
Yeah. There's in Solana Beach, still a big little yellow cottage, and it's called Center for Healthy Lifestyles.
And then I have another question. So demographically, during your research, did you see any differences? I mean, for example, Native people in California versus Native people in
I did generally in the U.S.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Well, I'm pulling up the next presentation. If everyone would like to scan this and do a feedback form, that'd be great. Thank you. Great job.
How do you spell your name?
Caitlin, K-T-E-L-E-D.
Yeah, that's it. You want me to just go up there?
Oh, I'm just gonna wait until I see everyone's phones away, and then I'll introduce you.
Oh, okay.
This is for you, though.
Can I go ahead and do that right now?
Oh yeah, absolutely, yeah. Okay, perfect. So next we have Adrian Joseph Centeno with Professor Lenny Tross, and he will be discussing decaffeination, extraction process, and qualitative considerations. Industrial decaffeination extractions are formulated to meet the consumer demands of decaffeinated products. Small-scale formulas allow for scaling upwards to meet such demands.
Thank you.
Hey, sorry guys, I put a lot of stuff in that title, probably more than I should have. But this is my presentation. My name is down there, Adrian Centeno. I didn't realize it was going to be that small, so my apologies. And so when I start off my presentation, I just want to start off with some caffeine facts. And some fun facts about caffeine. Its origins come from the East African nation of Ethiopia. Caffeine is the most widely consumed psychoactive drug. It's a little bit confusing when I say that, but it's no surprise to any of you that drink coffee that when you wake up, the feeling that you get of alertness and just an overall good feeling. H.E. Fisher first synthesized caffeine in 1895. What that means is he took a bunch of chemicals, he combined them, and he was able to recreate caffeine instead of the process where people get it from plants. To the right here is an image of what caffeine would look like in its pure form, and to the right is the chemical structure of it. And something else I want to point out is the production of caffeine. Brazil is the #1 producer of caffeine, and you can tell by these trends that it's just steadily increasing. And just below it is Vietnam, Indonesia, and Colombia. And if you look on the map, you'll find this big strip of land called the coffee belt, and it's not really called that. It's just the equatorial region. And why this region is so important is because the conditions for growing caffeine there are ideal. A lot of weather, good weather, a great climate, and just overall rain that produces the crop for the coffee bean. And something to point out about the coffee bean, it's not necessarily a bean. It grows in a plant. It's a fruiting body. And what you see there is not what you see at the stores or your local barista shop. What ends up happening is they take that berry, they go ahead and remove the husk through like industrial processes. Well, they'll remove that husk, and then they'll go ahead and they'll boil that, and then that's what you get at your local markets. To the right, that's a tea plant, which she's holding. So your teas, like your green, blacks, your oolongs, and then your matcha, they all come from the same plant, the Camellia sinensis. And so that's something I thought was very interesting to find out. Not all teas, I believe, come from the Camellia sinensis, but the majority of them do. And I just wanted to point those out for all of you. So the effects of caffeine are really interesting because caffeine does something very, very cool. Throughout the day, you have this thing that's called ATP, adenosine triphosphate. Basically, it's like your energy source. It's what keeps you going. It's what keeps you moving. But as the day progresses and as the day comes to a close, adenosine triphosphate, you lose that last part, that triphosphate, that fancy word, and you're left with this molecule or this compound. And as it builds up, you have these things in your neurons, which are the things that control like your brain and your behavior. And it has these like puzzle pieces do. It connects that adenosine into it. And so as the day progresses, you start feeling more and more tired. And that's because you're having this adenosine that's like attaching itself to it. And so what ends up happening, since caffeine has like a very similar structure to adenosine, what it ends up doing, it doesn't necessarily knock off adenosine, but instead attaches itself to these receptors. This is caffeine and that one's adenosine. So what ends up happening is your body saying like, hey, I'm tired, but then caffeine comes in and says like, no, you're not. You're gonna stay awake. And that's what gives you like this sense of awakeness or not feeling tired. And that's from the similarities in those structures, which is very fascinating. And so the issue then becomes like, what's the problem? Why worry about caffeine? Well, caffeine is all around us. If you walk into your supermarket, you have various options in caffeinated beverages, Red Bulls, your Celsius, and then you just have coffee. And so it's like, yeah, it's kind of becoming like an issue for some people. What does caffeine do to our body? It has excessive influence on our central nervous system. It's characterized by restlessness, excitement, insomnia, and sometimes mild delirium. And then some people, when they drink caffeine, they suffer from sleepiness, nervousness, intestinal discomfort, heart stimulation, and other effects after excessive amounts of drinking. And it's like, whoa, well, that's not good. But then similarly, for some people, excessive coffee, some people have a higher sensitivity. So excessive for some people can be 1 cup, 2 cups, or 3 cups. So caffeinated beverages are somewhat of an issue. And if you somehow want to wane yourself off of coffee, what you end up finding out is that you can wane yourself off because what you're a little craving for as well is the taste. So caffeine junkies can benefit from decaffeinated beverages, and industries today go ahead and decaffeinate or decaffeinate for that reason, because many people want their coffee, but they're trying to wane themselves off, and what they want now is just the flavor of it. And to the right are just some examples of the amounts of caffeine found in your drinks: drip coffee, nitro coffee, and then green tea. What's interesting about decaf, which I'll kind of discuss, is that it has some trace amounts of caffeine still in it. And that's because in the decaffeination process, when they remove caffeine from the bean, it's not exactly perfect all the time, so you're left with some residual amounts. But when you compare it to your regular coffees, that amount is somewhat negligible. There's hardly anything in there, but there is still trace amounts. And so we get to how industries decaffeinate coffee. I'm specifically going to look at coffee, or the coffee bean, and not so much the tea, because And it's somewhat of a similar process, but it just differs just slightly. And the 3 ways that major industries decaffeinate coffee beans today are through solvent decaffeination, carbon dioxide decaffeination, and water decaffeination. They're a little interesting, but I'll go ahead and discuss them right now. The first one I'll take a look at is solvent decaffeination. And solvent decaffeination, it's a fancy word, but it's just saying like it's using a chemical to remove caffeine. That's all it is. But there are many chemicals that do this for us today. And there are so many, but only some of them do it better than others. But some that do it better doesn't mean that they're the best choice. We have DCM, it's called dichloromethane, super fancy word, and has like a 8% solubility, so it means it takes 8% of the caffeine off of there, or some similar to that. And then you have trichloromethane, which has a 15%. It's interesting to note these things because you think that the higher, the more you can take out, the better it is. But there's a cost to that. The cost is that some of these solvents are going to be pretty toxic, and so some of them are just got avoided in industry today. And then here is just the process of how this occurs when you use solvent decaffeination. I'll take a look at this one more in depth since this is what I did in the laboratory at campus at Maricosta. And the next process that they do is carbon dioxide decaffeination. And already it might raise some hairs. It's like, whoa, CO2, isn't that bad? Well, it's all around us essentially. If you walk outside, you're going to have CO2 in the atmosphere. But this process is very interesting for the following reasons. The way it happens is pretty simple, but it has like very high implications. They first soak the coffee bean into water, then they apply carbon dioxide into it. The carbon dioxide is really good then at just removing the caffeine from the bean, and then all you're left with is the coffee bean, and it's completely decaffeinated. Well, not completely, it's like, there's a small trace amount, I think it's like 99.9% decaffeinated, but still the process is very simple, and the effects are really good on it. And to the right, you'll see the process here. And what's really nice about it is you have the water. The water is here again. They remove the CO2 from it, and then you're left with the water again. So it's recycled. And then the CO2 as well, it's recycled as well. And the next one I'll take a look at is the Swiss water process. I said earlier water decaffeination, it's the same thing. It's just companies, when they do water decaffeination, they just name it differently. You'll hear mountain water, decaffeination, mountain water, Pacific water. It's all using just water. This one is also very interesting too, because yeah, all you're using is just water. And what ends up happening is like if you've ever had put sugar into a cup of water and you just keep adding and adding and adding sugar, at some point you're gonna have it's not gonna be able to like disappear in the water. You're just gonna see the sugar in there. It's similar to how this process happens. Coffee beans are dripped into water. When the coffee bean is dripped in, put into water, the water takes away the flavor and the caffeine. But what ends up happening is you use like this filter that just selectively removes out the caffeine from the bean, and you're left with this rich water that has just the flavor molecules of that coffee bean. They toss away those beans, they repeat the process, but now instead of removing the caffeine and the flavor from the coffee bean, it just selectively leaches out the caffeine. And then the beans maintain their flavor. So this process is also very environmentally friendly, and it's also very efficient at removing caffeine. The picture on the far right shows you the composition of your bean. 74 insoluble products, that just basically means components that don't get removed away in water or in solvent. And then you have soluble compounds which do get removed, and then caffeine. And then again, this is just the process of how it looks like in industry. And then that's another one. This process usually takes around 10 hours, which is a lot of time, but it does it really well. And again, it's very similar to this carbon dioxide one. You have your water without caffeine, it grabs the coffee beans, takes the water, extracts the caffeine, and then a filter removes the caffeine, and then it recycles the water all over again. And this process is also very efficient. And so in industry, you have to consider like, okay, so which one do I pick? Like, what, as a consumer, where does this like affect me? Well, the considerations for us, when it affects us, is in the aroma considerations. For some people that drink coffee, what you really want is that taste. And the different methods that are incorporated in industry affect the taste. CO2 and then water decaffeination, those have like the least effects on the taste of the coffee, but similarly they have some effect on the taste. And then also solvent residues. This is very important. When I talk about the first method, you're using these supposedly toxic chemicals in the process. Even though at the end of the day, those chemicals get removed by the companies that are incorporating them into their process, there's still a stigma in there and thinking like, oh, the coffee I'm drinking was treated with these chemicals. It's essentially removed, but as consumers, we should be, there's a concern with that problem. And so we're left with wondering like, which one is better? Well, having considered all those things ahead of time, we're left with the carbon dioxide decaffeination method preferred as the better one. Why is it better? Because you're using a non-flammable and non-toxic substance, CO2. And most importantly, CO2 is everywhere. It exists unfortunately in nature. And although CO2 is a greenhouse gas, the process becomes very efficient when you can capture it from the atmosphere, you reuse it, and then you recycle it. So that's why CO2 of all the other methods is really good. And then again, this is just the process, again, just re-observe. And you'll see here is just some machinery or some buildings that are incorporating the CO2. It's a rather complicated process to undergo, but we as consumers or in a small scale, they wouldn't do something like this, which is why it's beneficial for companies to utilize this method of decaffeination. Okay, so before I go ahead and talk about what I did in lab, I just want to briefly mention the tea that I used to first decaffeinate, and it was the Earl Grey black tea. And the reason why I chose that tea to decaffeinate in the laboratory was because it had a high concentration of caffeine in it, close to 30 to 60 milligrams of caffeine, whereas all the other ones don't. And just again to reiterate that point, that this tea all comes from the same plant, Camellia sinensis. And this is just the farm and how they cultivate and how they grab the leaves. Okay, and then again, just to look at some of the solvents again, you have water. If any of you like do coffee at home, you'll put it in a little funnel and you'll throw hot water in there. It's no surprise that that one has the highest solubility for caffeine because, well, that's how you extract coffee in it. And then you have these other ones, ethyl acetate and then chloroform. Again, chloroform, even though it has a high percentage of extracting caffeine now, it's very toxic, so it's not used and it's not even considered. And then you have ethyl acetate. This is the one I use in laboratory, super cheap, and it's very useful because there's an abundant amount of it. Okay, so this is the coffee and tea extraction. These are the 5 bags removed, and this is the product. I went ahead and just put them in this beaker. I went ahead and then did this fancy thing of vacuum filtration where you just pour it in, it gets all the chemicals in there get removed, and then I'm left with that product right there. And then after a while, I put it in the separatory funnel, and what you see here are different layers. This one has caffeine in it, and this one has a bunch of other water and salts and stuff. And then this here is what it looks like after I remove the bottom layer, and this is just the caffeine with that solvent, that toxic solvent, unfortunately. And what I'm doing here is I'm boiling it off, and at the end of the day, I'm left with this caffeine amount. And so that's what I had extracted from my laboratory. And the next one I decided to do was the Starbucks Venti Blonde Espresso Caffeine Drink. Tried saying that a couple of times. And so this one was 500 milliliters, and then I went in and grabbed it. The issue here, extracting caffeine, there's a lot of water in there. So I have to remove it by boiling it off. Luckily for milk, it's 87.5% water, easy to remove. Boil it off. Oh, not so easy. Why? Because there were some issues involved in the experiment. It's all good. It's all good though. I went ahead and managed it to a lower volume. Put it in this guy here, put some chemicals in there, burned it off, and then boom, caffeine. It's a little gross because there's still milk in there, but whatever. I did the DNA on the original tea extraction. This thing is basically telling me like, it's like the DNA in chemistry right here. And this is the compound. I got this graph. Everything matches with the DNA thing. I didn't do the same with the coffee, with the Starbucks drink, but instead I compared it to the tea one. It's like a Venn diagram. This coffee is a coffee from the tea there. Yep. Is my Starbucks close to it? Yep. Good. It is caffeine. And so the takeaways then when we decaffeinate, or as consumers, something that could be considered is like, why do it? Well, with the effects of caffeine on our body, it stimulates us, it makes us go, but at the end of the day, unfortunately, we suffer a crash. Why? Because we're preventing all these things from attaching themselves to our neurons or the things in our brain telling us like, hey, you're tired, it's time to go to sleep. So therefore, decaffeination is really important. You can still have, because it allows us to experience that nice, great taste that we get with coffee, but with the less of the crash at the end of the day. And extractions on the scale, in the lab, easy to do. We can use any chemicals we want, and then we can verify if there's actually caffeine in our product. On a large scale, they can use things like carbon dioxide, they can recycle water and reuse it and everything. So to them, it's much more economical to do that. So Yeah, that presents the end of my presentation. My sources, extra pictures. Any questions?
So I work at Phil's Coffee, and on the menu, it says Swiss water process, and
Yeah.
I never knew what that meant.
Yeah.
And I always ask people, like my coworkers, what does that mean? I don't know. But now I know. So thank you.
Yeah.
But which devices are used to measure caffeine? Like, Anna, do you know like what devices could be used to measure, like to determine, oh, this many grams of caffeine are in this amount of coffee?
So that's what, so I'm not too sure, I wouldn't know exactly how they do it, but it's similar to like in the laboratory. I have like
Yeah.
there, I have like a percent yield, but it was very low. It's like 29.29%. I'm not so sure how they would do it in industry because mine there was a lot of errors, but it's similar to how I would think it's similar to probably how I would do it. But yeah, other than that, I'm not too sure. Yeah, how they would figure out the exact amount of caffeine within their beverage. They'd probably do it much more efficiently than I would have done it in the laboratory, unfortunately.
I bet like just being in the laboratory, I bet that all smelled so good.
Oh yeah, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, maybe without all those toxic chemicals, but yeah, I'm pretty sure it should still smell pretty good.
Did you have to wear a mask when you
Yeah, just goggles.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a fume hood. So like in the laboratories,
Yeah.
for the chemistry laboratories,
Oh, okay.
yeah,
right.
you have like the fume hood, like where you can put
Yeah.
your chemicals, and it sucks up the chemicals, and you don't have to like inhale them.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's really good. Oh yes.
Is that what the caffeine looks like?
Yeah.
That little.
Yeah, it's this guy right here. So I showed a picture in the beginning. Let me see if I can get, well, actually it's
Yeah,
put-
it looked like fibrous.
Yeah, so that's exactly what it looks like. It's a little yellowish because it's still kind of like unpure. There's more process that it could undergo to make it look like in that pure form. But yeah, that's technically what it looks like. Yeah.
What would happen if you were to eat just that? Would that be like?
So I've heard about that. There's like a big like scientist like even I've heard a podcast where the girl was like, yeah, I still would not touch it. Like even though it's like really it's supposed to be pure, even after like the process afterward, it's like the way she stated, it's like it's like a sort of like irrational thinking. It's like, yeah, you know there's nothing there, but at the same time, it's like you wouldn't like clean out these beakers, take them home, and then drink from it. Like it's just like it's kind of like you wouldn't want to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, you could potentially do it. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. So back to like one of the first slides talking about the ATP.
Yeah.
So you're saying that it kind of replaces the triphosphate?
So I haven't taken that class yet. I've only taken like a biology one, but from what I've understood is like the triphosphate portion kind of like breaks off, and so you're left with the adenosine, and then adenosine has like these receptors that it binds to as it accumulates throughout the day. But caffeine, I guess, goes in and then it just binds itself to those receptors.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
regarding like working out using ATP and stuff, does that replacement serve as like aid, do you think, for exercise, or do you think it's better in its natural ATP form?
I actually don't know. Yeah. That I don't know. I heard that there's a lot of talk or communication about like drinking coffee before a workout, but how that goes, if it's good or healthy, I have no idea, to be honest.
The photo where you showed comparing, I think it was like the tea and the Starbucks drink. It was like on the little green like film towards the end.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, go that one. The like what was that again?
It's TLC is thin layer chromatography. Basically, what it does is it looks at like the polarity of that compound, and since hopefully my professor. So, like it's submerged in the solvent, the ethyl acetate itself, and like up here, like it starts steadily climbing up to here. And what it does is like at the beginning, before I put it in the solvent, I grab like the caffeine, I put it in a solvent, I dab it right there from the tea. And then I did one for the tea and the Starbucks drink. I dotted them at the same time in the middle. And then towards the end, I just did one for Starbucks. And it serves as like a kind of control to assess like, it's like a comparison of sorts to see if like this one actually is similar to the structure of this one.
since they have similar polarities. And there's a lot more, but all it's saying is like, it's going to be caffeine if it doesn't move up. If this blotch doesn't move up and it wants to stay down, further down below, then that tells me that it is caffeine.
So there's like two different polarities on the side of the paper?
Yeah, so like down here it's polar. It's polar, and as it moves up, it's more non-polar. So is it like dissolves light? So if it was non-polar, then the non-polar parts would move up. The polar parts, since the polar and polar go together, they would stay at the bottom.
Okay.
Yeah, so caffeine, I believe, is polar. I remember is polar. So it's just going to stay down at the bottom. So it shouldn't be moving up. If it moved up, then that would have told me that my extraction was incorrect. That something had gone wrong, that I did not extract out caffeine. But since it matches with what I got from tea, and I verified that what I did extract out from my tea was caffeine, it's all good.
Great job.
Thank you.
We'll have to for next presentation. Please fill out the feedback form.
What was your name again?
Adrian?
So we're seeing cool. The deviation is kind of yeah. We can make a question. That's fine. Other levels. So next we have Megan Doozy talking about endometriosis, a chronic female reproductive disorder, with Professor Mentor Tina Walker.
So hi, my name is Megan Doozy. I'm in anatomy with Professor Tina Walker. We were tasked with doing a research project on a disorder, so I chose endometriosis, which is a chronic female reproductive disorder. So to start off, I'll go over basic female reproductive system anatomy. So the three organs that are mainly pertinent to this disorder are the uterus, and there's three layers of the uterus. The outer layer, you can kind of see that white lining, is the perimetrium. This thicker layer is the myometrium, and then the inner layer right here, which is known as the endometrium. Off the uterus, there's two uterine tubes, so you can see one right there, and then it's attached to ovaries. So, dealing with endometriosis, there is a normal function of that endometrial layer of the uterus, and every month it builds up within the uterus to prepare the female body for pregnancy. If the female body does not become pregnant, then that tissue will break down and pass through blood during menstruation. So there's the abnormal growth of the endometrial tissue, and it grows around the uterus and surrounding organs. So it'll grow on the perimetrium, that outer layer of the uterus, and it can also affect the uterine tubes and ovaries, and even more organs if it progresses far enough, as this is a progressive disorder. So who gets endometriosis? So any female who is able to become pregnant and reproduce, 10% of these women will have endometriosis. So it is a really common disorder, and it's not talked about a lot because of the commonly mistaken symptoms of heavy and painful periods, painful intercourse, and female bloating. These are all symptoms of PMS. However, they are heightened in this disorder and often mistaken in a clinical setting. So this is a rough image of what that endometrial-like tissue looks like when it grows on the outside of the uterus. So we can see how that might affect it negatively and affect the growth. And it will also cause inflammation, cysts, lesions, which can further affect the reproductive system and progress this disorder from endometriosis to something like endometrial cancer, cervical cancer, and more. So hormones play a very big role in the female reproductive system. The two main hormones are estrogen and progesterone. They kind of counteract each other. So estrogen is known as the hormone to grow, and that's what's going to initiate the growth of the endometrial tissue within the uterus, the normal layer that's supposed to be there. And whereas progesterone is the thinning hormone, so it's going to offset estrogen. And progesterone is also known to be a hormone that lessens your risk of having breast cancer and endometrial cancer, cervical cancer, whereas estrogen, high levels of estrogen can increase your chances of getting those cancers. Therefore, higher estrogen plays a key role in endometriosis because it heightens the symptoms. So it's going to make the chronic pain even worse because it is that growth hormone, to say. So these symptoms of endometriosis include dysmenorrhea, which is that unmanageable menstrual pain. This pain can happen even when a female is not menstruating, and so this pain oftentimes takes females out of work, out of school, and that is something that has been normalized. However, it should not be normalized, although it is common. Another symptom is the menorrhagia, which is heavy menstrual bleeding, also a symptom that is common but shouldn't be normalized. And this can also affect the amount of time that someone is on their period. This in return causes irregular menstruation, so their cycle gets messed up and out of order more frequently. With that, the unmanageable menstrual cramps will cause nausea and vomiting, and the biggest symptom is that infertility is a big risk with this disorder, and it affects 30 to 50 women with endometriosis. So diagnosis for this disorder is very complex and time consuming because there is a lack of research on this disorder. So the only way to confirm a diagnosis of endometriosis is through laparoscopic surgery. So although it is minimally invasive, surgery to diagnose something is very invasive in my opinion. To avoid that, the provider will start by going through a very detailed patient history, as some physicians think that this disorder is linked to genes and genetic inheritance. However, there's no proof on that, so that can't be used to determine. There's 4 stages of this disorder: stage 1, 2, 3, and 4. It's ranked the same as cancer. Stages 3 and 4 are known as deep infiltrating endometriosis, which means that it's going to affect other organs. So stage 3 affects organs such as your bladder within that pelvic cavity. Whereas stage 4, it can affect organs outside of the pelvic cavity. So it can affect your liver, small intestines, large intestines, stomach, everything. after they get the patient history with the stages 3 and 4 may be indicative through imaging such as MRI and ultrasound. However, you won't be able to see stage 1 and 2 through those imaging, so it's also not a method that is used to confirm a diagnosis. Even if it is stage 3 and 4, they must perform that surgery to confirm it. And the strategy of that surgery is they will go in, inflate the abdomen with CO2 gas to get a better look at that region, and then they will take tissue and biopsy it and determine whether it's endometrial-like tissue and then go from there. So treatment on this disorder is also very time-consuming and complex, as there's 2 different routes that they can go. And this is very dependent on the patient's wishes and needs. So if a patient is not wanting to become pregnant in the foreseeable future, then they will jump to medications. And these medications are known to us as birth control. So it's going to be the basic combination oral contraceptive, which is a combination of estrogen and progestin. So something about that, the women with endometriosis are at higher risk to have high levels of estrogen, which is what causes symptoms and side effects such as weight gain and acne. So many women will start on that, and then they will have negative side effects, which also includes depression, mood disorders, and then they'll be switched to the progestin-only pill. The point of the combination is to ease into that hormone balance, and then moving on to the progestin-only pill to lower that estrogen even more. These are commonly taken with an aromatase inhibitor. And then if a patient is wanting to become pregnant, to deal with this disorder, she will have to have surgery to remove the endometrial tissue to get herself out of that 30 to 50% of infertility risk. Most of them are still laparoscopic. However, depending on the stage, if it's more invasive, if it's affecting those upper organs such as the liver and stomach, then they may have to do a more invasive surgery. But we can see here with the diagram how they fill up the abdomen with gas, and then you can see uterus, uterine tube, and ovary. So, women are seeking other treatments that are non-medical. There's a distrust in pharmaceuticals, especially with birth control. Many women do not want to participate in hormone therapy. So they've taken it into their own hands to balance their hormones by completely cutting out processed food. So these women who go this route, instead of consulting physicians, will completely cut out processed food and only eat whole foods. They'll find ways to relieve stress, so that's like meditation, yoga, and consistently exercising. So kind of changing their habits to have those in their life. There's books on this where they've seen changes within themselves. However, there's no published journals that say whether this is a confirmed way to treat endometriosis. So women's health as a whole, this is one of many female reproductive disorders that lack research, just from the fact that a woman will require surgery just to diagnose. There has to be better ways to diagnose this disorder as well as others, especially because this disorder, if left untreated, it is progressive and can result in the female having cervical cancer, endometrial cancer, and more. So with this pain, since the main symptom of this disorder is pain, it's good to note that pain in women is taken less seriously than men in a medical environment, especially because these symptoms are associated with menstruating and the female cycle. So it's very important to be an advocate for yourself in the medical environment, and to talk about these disorders more so that more research can be funded for these female disorders. And male disorders too. I personally am not touching on that right now, but there's just a lack of research as a whole with reproductive disorders, which is surprising because obviously reproduction is very important. So it would make sense to try to keep those organs healthy and these women and men taken care of. But yeah, these are my sources. I really find the Mayo Clinic helpful. They also have videos on YouTube that are easy to watch, and it's the physicians themselves talking, which I appreciate. So, yeah, thank you.
Now we will begin the 5-minute Q&A.
The distrust in pharmaceuticals, is that kind of like, I don't know, I'm sorry, I don't really think about this, but is that kind of like, is that along the lines of like anti-vaccine, or what does that mean?
No, it's more like pharmaceutical companies are, they get funded a lot, so they get a lot of money for pushing these medications, pushing birth controls. There's, I'm not sure if any women here, but birth control, when you get the package, it comes with like this tiny little brochure that's like this big. But when you unfold it, it turns into like this big, and that's all the risks of taking birth control. But it's not commonly talked about. So a lot of people don't realize that. So that's where the distrust in pharmaceuticals, doctors pushing medications. So yeah. Yes.
I was wondering if you look into which population like ethnicity-wise.
I personally did not. Doing further research, I definitely would like to do that. Research done on like female reproductive system is already low, and so is the care for them in a clinical setting. So I assume that in like populations where they're underserved, I think would be even worse because they're less likely to get treated and less likely to go in and be an advocate for themselves, which I'd like to try and help women feel more comfortable advocating for themselves, because it's easy to feel dumb in these settings because they kind of push you down, like, no, your pain tolerance just isn't like a man, so you're dealing with this kind of pain, that's normal, when in fact it's not. So I think in those communities it would be higher and more risky. Yes.
I'm curious if you found that there was an age at which women are getting diagnosed?
It's any woman who's able to hold a pregnancy. So from the time that a female will get her period to that menopause stage.
Yeah.
So that's when their risk lowers. And actually they used to, this is kind of off track, but they used to use hysterectomies as the only treatment for this disorder, but they realized that actually messes up the hormones even more when they completely remove the entire reproductive system. So, yes.
And you mentioned that it's like not completely understood whether or not like how it's like transferred.
Yeah, they haven't confirmed a cause. There hasn't been enough research to confirm a cause. They believe that it's because of the imbalance of hormones, or it could be genetic. However, they have no proof of either. Yes.
So how long does it usually take for it to like grow or spread?
That's a really good question. Many women go in because their pain was so like normalized. They thought like, oh, this is just like more PMS symptoms. So they'll wait and then they'll go in and they'll be at stage 3 or 4. So it's very progressive, and it progresses quickly because the tissue does build up every month still, just on those the outer edges of the organs, and it has no place to pass because it still breaks down every month. So that can cause like higher symptoms with like the inflammation and pain and stuff. So, yeah.
when they do the surgeries, like the laparoscopic surgeries to remove the outer tissues, or the abnormal tissues, do they grow back over time, or is it a permanent
Yeah.
solution when they do a surgery?
So it's not a permanent solution, and oftentimes it will continue to grow back. That's why they try to check in with the hormones constantly, like balancing those out, because estrogen is linked to it and the growth of it. Because estrogen is the hormone that prepares the body for pregnancy, so it's going to build that layer up. So lowering the estrogen levels seems to help decrease the amount that's grown, but it still happens regardless.
So they may need multiple surgeries throughout their life,
Yeah.
potentially.
Yep.
Is there a point at which a hysterectomy is like recommended? Because if someone were to be put on, like.
Yes, there are cases where they still do it because of how invasive it had gotten. So if they didn't get treatment for a very long time, they've already experienced the infertility, never saw a provider, then it could get to the point where it's causing those cysts and lesions and making those organs not viable for a pregnancy. So in that case, when they're experiencing that level of pain, then they'll possibly do the hysterectomy. However, it creates, it kind of has the female go through menopause after they have the hysterectomy. So they try to encourage women not to do that, especially as like the first thing, but it is a last resort, depending on what stage it is and how far they are, if they've had kids. So they really take all that into consideration when deciding that.
Great job. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Alrighty, so now we have a break. So feel free to go get some more food, prepare for the next presenters, and yeah, we'll be back in 10 minutes. So next we have Isaac Hernandez, Silas Black, and Live Ragnar Berg, and with Dr. Acaro, with investigating the connection between airborne particulate matter and seawater ion concentrations relative to rainfall in coastal San Diego.
Thank you. Yeah, so our title is, as you guys can see, exploring connections between air quality and water quality in relation to rainfall. So Silas is going to lead you guys through a quick introduction.
So just to kind of break down a little bit of what we're talking about. So what we wanted to look at is during rainfall in a lot of places, the air quality drastically improves. And this is due to something that's called like a cleansing effect that the rainfall has on the lower atmosphere, which is called the troposphere. So basically the rain washes like suspended particulate matter, which is just pollutants, aerosols, anything that's hanging around in the water, in the air. This is all washed out of the air during rainfall. And so what we see is an improvement in air quality immediately following the rain. So what we wanted to look at here was looking at San Diego County, for starters. When it experienced, there was a huge rainfall at the beginning of November last month. And this was the first rainfall in like 3 or 4 months. And so what we wanted to look at is the water quality compared to the air quality immediately following the rainfall and 2 weeks after the rainfall as things start to balance out again. And so this phenomenon, this like cleansing effect, it's not entirely studied in depth. There's a couple studies. One study that took place in Kuwait looked at the acidity of rainwater over industrial areas versus areas that were less industrialized or more rural. And they found that rainwater generally over more industrial and higher populated areas was more acidic. And so with this happening in San Diego, we wanted to see when this rainfall is occurring, how it impacts the dissolved ion content in the actual seawater itself. Because when the rain's washing all these ions out of the air and chemicals out of the air, these chemicals are accumulating in waterways. And so these areas highlighted in orange, which you can't really see too well, but all of you guys, if you're familiar with San Diego, you know that when you're driving along the 5, you come through the dips in the topography and the landscape. Those are waterways, like there's lagoons. These are all outlets for rainwater. They're called coastal wetlands. And these are protected like ecological reserves usually. And so we have Agua Hedionda, which is in Carlsbad. It's a stinky water one. It's Tamarack. We have Bad Vaquitos, which is the another one in Carlsbad. It's by Ponto. San Elijo, which is in Cardiff. San Dieguito, which is that's in Del Mar. It's like the dog beach. So all of these. And we'll go on. We also, there's also San Diego Bay and Tijuana River Sewage is another huge one and probably the grossest by far out of all of them. But all of these coastal wetlands, they're fed into by rainwater and runoff that comes from all of these areas, even up all the way like further inland. So as far as like Escondido, for example. And so what we looked at for this study was carbonate ion concentration in the seawater relative to particulate matter concentrations in the air. And so we took samples, that's actually part of the procedure, I'll wait to go over that stuff. But yeah, so for that huge rainfall that happened at the beginning of November, San Diego Department of Environmental Health and Water Quality issued an advisory against seawater exposure within 72 hours, and this was because of high levels of contamination and pollution and from runoff from that rainfall. And so we know there's a relationship between carbon dioxide, which is one of the things that is washed out of the air when it rains, and the acidity of the seawater. So when carbon dioxide, as many of you guys maybe have heard of ocean acidification, something that happens when carbon dioxide is washed out of the air, it reacts in the seawater to make it more acidic, pretty much. And this can decrease the carbonate concentration. Carbonate is an ion within the seawater that marine organisms are using to make their, like crustaceans will use, make their shells. It's called calcification. They combine calcium with carbonate to make calcium carbonate. Anyways, this dissolves under more acidic conditions. So when the carbon dioxide enters the seawater, the more acidity makes these ions dissolve and leads to a lower level of carbonate ion in seawater. And so that was our hypothesis, that immediately following the rainfall that we would see lower carbonate concentrations than compared to after the rainfall. And I'll hand it over to Live for talking about our question and hypothesis.
So this all prompted the question, how do airborne particulate counts how do airborne particulate counts relate to the dissolved ion concentrations when it's dissolved in the rainfall? And we were looking specifically at locations in San Diego County. So our hypothesis was that we anticipate that there will be an increase in the carbonate ion concentration over time, since we were not able to collect water samples before the rainfall. We did not get before and after. So we decided to look at directly after compared to 2 weeks after. So again, we anticipate that there will be an increase in the ion concentration. And then Isaac for the procedure.
So to test for carbonate concentration in coastal seawater for those mentioned locations, we collected 2 samples that were roughly 2 weeks apart from each other. Day 1 being that within 24 hours of the rainfall, and day 2 being 2 weeks after rainfall. So going on with the test, we titrated the seawater with 0.1 molarity HCl, and we continued to titrate for 2 to 3 titrations to get roughly an 8% error between each one, and to get kind of like the most accurate results. When we were collecting the seawater, we made sure that it was roughly at the same time and at the same tides as shown in these graphs right here. So along with this, we also use purple air sensors in order to kind of measure the carbon the aerosol concentrations for 2.5 micromolarity and then 10.0 micromolarity. We found 1 to 2 sensors per each location that the water was collected. Although we chose the one sensor to collect the data from in order to what's next?
So we did in fact find that our hypothesis was correct. There was an increase in carbonate concentrations. So you could see, we can't say that there was a dip, but there is anticipated that there was a dip right after the rainfall. So the carbonate concentration was significantly lower directly after the rainfall than compared to 2 weeks after. So you saw a steady increase. The same goes for the alkalinity. The alkalinity of the water rised as well. This basically tells us that the water became more acidic in relation to a rainfall event. And as time passed, the acidity kind of stabilized and went back to closer to what is considered a normal acidity of the ocean, which is around 8.1 in pH. These bar graphs show, so the red, can't really see the titles of the graphs in the picture, but so each couple of bar graphs show the carbonate concentration in the water. The red is for 24 hours or within 12 hours of the rainfall, and the blue one is 2 weeks after for each location. And as you can see, we have a couple of outliers, but that could be a result of poor pH probes or such. And these purple graphs are the purple air sensors. So we have the same trends with the airborne particulate counts. And then we have the orange and green graphs that show the pH of the seawater, where the green is 2 weeks after and the orange is within 12 hours. So we had an average change of the carbonate ion. It was approximately 85 micromolar change. So it's a small change, but it's a significant change. And with that, I want to make sure that we covered all of the results.
So to kind of like clarify some of the results. So red, as Lai was talking about, is directly after the rainfall. Blue is further along, 2 weeks after the rainfall. And so overall, we saw an increase in carbonate concentrations from that 12-hour to 336-hour period. But for some of the samples, which Bataquitos was one of them, Bataquitos actually saw a reverse of that. And so bad ketos actually had a higher carbonate concentration. It did not, actually. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, I'm thinking of a different data set. San Elijo, on the other hand, actually, so all of the data points followed this trend. San Elijo, though, had an extremely low carbonate concentration to begin with. And so if you guys these are our samples from immediately after the rainfall for each of the 7 locations.
Yeah, they're
And
going
so-
in order from us
Yeah,
down.
so this will go north to south, right? And so we have Agua Hedionda, Bataquitos, San Elijo, and then on from that. But if you look at all the rest of the samples, they're like clear water, like you look like you almost might be able to drink it. And then you get to San Elijo, which is like brown, like golden water. And so this is the sample. This corresponds to this red bar right here. That's way down at like just 10% of like almost all the other carbonate concentrations. That also happened for this Los Penasquitos as well.
Yeah.
So the fact that it's happened twice, it's an outlier for sure, but it could be due to like, maybe those areas, there's some point source pollution or something that's coming from the immediate landscape that's affecting that immediately after the rainfall. Like there's something that made the water super acidic and lowered that concentration of carbonates. So yeah, overall, just the changes are the most important thing that we saw with the data. Not necessarily the measurements themselves, just because of like sensor error and stuff like that. But should we move on to the conclusion?
Our data, again, did show that our hypothesis is supported, but we cannot draw a confident conclusion that carbon dioxide was, in fact, because we weren't able to test for the airborne carbon dioxide. However, we do see that there is a possibility for a correlation between airborne particulate matter and the acidity of the water in relation to rainfall. So in the future, we would like to increase our confidence in the water that we test by also testing quantitatively for chloride ion. That would show us whether the water we test is a part of the runoff from the inland. So the concentration of chloride ions would be lower in that water than in the seawater. So that way we could see if the acidity of the water is a direct result of carbon dioxide being dissolved in the rainfall.
Another thought for the future, we tested quantitatively for chloride ions in the water samples, as well as in the future. We can confirm that carbonate is the fact that using the carbonate ions, we can confirm in the future that as a result, CO2 is being dissolved in rainwater and not formed from runoff. They're coming from the runoff into the coastal seawater and affecting it.
Right, so to kind of like wrap up everything and talk about maybe like the significance of like this kind of process and how it impacts these like coastal wetland areas. So we talked about that process of ocean acidification. And so there's a lot of detriments that these pollutants and like lower acidity can have on these like coastal wetlands, which are like key ecosystem services to like the San Diego natural landscape. And in part, like that's most of the natural ecosystem of San Diego and that landscape. These are like have been deteriorating over time. But yeah, with increasing amounts of CO2, right, and so like with a general increase in carbon dioxide, atmospheric carbon dioxide over time, and like increasing general concentrations of carbon dioxide and the amount of industrialization and development and, new hotels being built along the beach and ocean side and all this stuff happening, there's going to be more pronounced cleaning effects that the rainfall, we think it can be hypothesized, it hasn't been studied fully, that there will be more pronounced rainfall cleansing effects and more pollutants will be making it in from the more particulate matter. For instance, like in LA with like the thick smog layer that you can see, more of that pollution is going to be making it into coastal seawater and stuff. And so hopefully this work that we tried to accomplish is better helping to shed light on that process, specifically in San Diego County. And so we have some references down here and stuff, and we'll take any questions because we were preparing for this to be a poster and for us to have people coming by and being able to read the poster. We didn't go into this expecting to have to talk as if we were presenting in a slideshow, but so forgive us if everything is kind of like a little bit spotty and stuff. But if you have any questions or anything, we'd love to clarify any information.
We also have really funny stories about collecting the seawater.
I want to hear the stories.
Yeah. So the first day that we collected the seawater, we started at Carlsbad here, and we went onto a bridge on the Tamarack, and in the process of trying to get the water, we had small water bottles, and we really didn't think through what was collecting the water.
It was
and it's just so many big waves, and I nearly crashed. I nearly fell into the rocks and died.
Oh, wait,
And then we optimized.
That's dedication.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Wow.
Collecting these water samples, and we had Silas in the water, and
I was the designated. I took off my shoes for.
These are surfers. This is cold weather.
yeah.
And I just went in the water.
You went to the water after the rain, right?
Directly after the rain.
Yeah.
We didn't go in the water, but
It wasn't
Oh.
raining.
it was at night, right? It was
Yeah.
from 8 to midnight or so.
No, the first night we weren't back until 2 a.m.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah.
He was literally
I almost
sleeping
killed us all.
on the road. I had to wake him up.
I almost killed us all
Yeah.
on the way back, but it took a little longer than anticipated. So we started up north at 8 o'clock, and then we drove south, and then we collected the last sample at 1:30
Oh my goodness.
down by the border, and then we had to drive all the way back up and had to drop off these two guys.
That's scary. Tijuana River Slough is scary.
Yeah,
It's a scary place.
it is
Oh
for
my
sure.
goodness. This is not what I expected.
Yeah.
Nothing about that.
So after that first
Yeah,
event
that's good.
where I nearly fell, we decided to get a bunch of things. I brought a container, and I brought a hydro flask and a fishing rod. So whenever we couldn't reach it, we attached the hydro flask to the fishing rod and just
Yeah.
we made sure to prime the water bottles to make sure there's no impurities in the water.
Yeah.
So we primed it twice before. He was very strict about it.
Yeah, so making sure that we're finding the bottles.
Consistency is key.
Do you guys have a favorite lagoon?
That crazy one right here. The sticky water is it smells so bad.
It did smell
And
bad.
that's San Alejo, right?
San Diego.
Yes.
Why is it so dirty?
It's a good question.
There's a lot of
That's a great
I think
question.
my favorite one was probably Dog Beach. It was the easiest one to collect. It was you just kind of swipe the water.
That's by the racetrack, right?
Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
That's true. That's a good point.
Oh. Awesome. Any questions?
Go ahead.
That's fairgrounds too. They go watch that.
There's a lot of variables here, right, to consider. So I'm curious, what do you think are some of the weaknesses of this, right? Not in a derogatory way, but science, right? How do we tighten up the science and be very clear about what we can conclude from this data? What are the weaknesses that are inherent to the process and your access to the equipment that you have?
So one weakness for sure is our lack of ability to test for CO2. So That's like probably the biggest weakness that we have.
Right, because we're saying, we're looking at air quality, but that particulate matter, so we looked at PM 2.5, it's the little sensors have laser counters and air passes through the sensors and little particles that are 2.5 microns in diameter are picked up. This is the reading, this is the average amount of those particles per cubic meter. And so those particles could have anything on in like as a part of them. It could be carbon dioxide. The weakness is that we're drawing this assumption that those with that decrease in particles, there's also a decrease in carbon dioxide concentration, which isn't necessarily like that's a guess. That's like a shot almost in the dark.
It's an educated guess.
It's an educated. It is an educated. Yeah, actually, it's not quite a shot in the dark because it's one of the fifth most. It's either the fifth most has the fifth most air pollution in the like California, or it could be on a bigger scale than that. But that's in our references. EPA says that.
It's an educated guess because we know for a fact that there is carbon dioxide in the air, but we also know for a fact that carbon dioxide does dissolve in rainwater. So we know that it's there. We can't confidently draw a conclusion that the measurements in the PM 2.5, even though we know that it's there, we also have other stuff that is a part of
obviously,
this.
and the biggest weakness, I think, in especially looking at this, well, there's two other weaknesses that I want to go over. One of them being that this rain, we're not isolating, the rain's not falling in an isolated system. This system, that the runoff that's making itself into the waterways, like we're talking about with San Elijo, it's falling over a used fairground. It's washing all of this like stuff from the streets, brake dust, whatever else, agricultural runoff. All this stuff's making it into the waterways. So we can't necessarily say that the air quality, that the particulate matter or the stuff that's being dissolved in the rainwater is actually what's causing this difference in chemical characteristics of the seawater. But and the other weakness is this carbonate concentration. It's a result of like so carbonate ion concentrations, we don't fully, and within the scope of general chemistry, which is this project, what this project is for, we don't totally understand the process of the production of that carbonate because it comes from a bunch of different sources, limestone, rocks, carbonates coming from all sorts of things, and it's used, it cycles in the like marine ecosystem and stuff as a chemical that's used, a compound that's used by marine life, but we can't, it's hard to draw a connection between CO2 entering the seawater as well and that carbonate concentration, although we do know that's like a huge part of ocean acidification.
Yeah, can I add something as well?
Yeah.
So during the process of actually titrating these, the picture's not coming up right now for some reason, but actually here you can actually see it. Here, this is our setup that we used. It's a BRA. This is a pH probe, and under the pH probe, the pH probe is inserted into a drop counter, which records volume, and we calibrated those things. These they've worked. Although we did get an 8%, roughly an 8% error. The pH probe wasn't really designed to test for seawater. So sometimes there is kind of like we're kind of iffy on how accurate this data is, but overall, if in the future we were to do more research on this, we would like to probably use more equipment for this.
Yeah, more
Definitely want
titrations
to
as well.
sample.
Just
Yeah.
repetitions.
Make a trend.
Consistent.
With more titrations.
So many things. There's actually a ton of factors.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's kind of ridiculous.
We
A
have
bunch
fun.
of improvements that could be made.
It gives me
but
anxiety.
only if we have time and
Yeah.
resources.
Exactly.
So we kind of had to work with what we had, and I think we were able to do, like, we made the most out of what we had, for sure. but it's definitely interesting, and it is something that is not been like researched. We were struggling really in the beginning to find like resources that had done similar research, because apparently people aren't as interested in CO2 and rainfall
Yeah,
and
the majority,
ocean,
yeah.
I guess. So yeah, it's definitely something that is interesting, and we would like to do more, but we'll have to see how that goes.
So, a question for, I think it's great that you guys have learned a lot about the research process in general through doing this and seeing, you know, some of the struggles that you might have, or things that after the fact you're like, oh, I wish I had that, I wish I had this.
Yeah.
You know, that's a great learning process. In particular to this research that you did, so if you were to go on and continue this research and do more pre and post measurements of air quality, water quality, all of that, what do you think the final goal of that would be? Would there be some type of intervention? Do you think you could make some type of change in terms of the environment or process? So kind of what could this research contribute down the road to improving our quality of life, our health, our environment?
So ultimately, it's more of environment and the health of the animals that live in the environment that we're researching.
Mm-hmm.
So with this research, we could gain some important knowledge about how we could prevent the ocean acidification, and hopefully we would be able to help animals that suffer from having a more acidic environment, like the animals that have hard shells, and that's only one example.
I also like to point out that while thinking about the question for this project, it came from the rule of thumb that after rainfall, surfers usually should stay away like 3 days.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of where we got this first idea. And also, personally, with this research, I'd also like to aim towards really improving the understanding of this overall seawater and how the factors that affects it, like Clyde mentioned.
Yeah, like how we affect seawater and how we can reduce our imprint on, like, what was it called? Reduce our footprint on nature. So.
Right, so yeah, exactly what Live's talking about and stuff. So this is just part of a broader, just kind of monitoring how the environment's changing over time. And this is in relation to obviously Southern California, there's an insane amount of development and urban planning and stuff that's happening. Over time, that urban planning and that development, that's something that should be, the environmental factors should be taken into account. It's something that is this rainfall. This is one of many countless phenomenon that happen as a result of pollution and an increasing amount of we're only experiencing more and more problems because of increasing atmospheric carbon dioxide and increasing levels of pollution, the population rise. It's just par for the course. But really, these are part of positive feedback loops that occur in the environment. So that more amounts of pollutants in the air is going to correlate to more amounts of maybe. And this is just one example of a process that's a positive feedback loop for that. That can eventually potentially impact human lives and human health. And people are in the ocean all the time. Rainwater falling on people, you don't want the rainwater to be too acidic to where it's not that that's a legitimate concern, but that's just a hyperbole of you don't want the rainwater to be dissolving people's, it's so acidic that it burns your skin. But just, policy measures in the future can be based around, that's the only way for people to kind of see what's really going on in terms of environmental change.
Thank you so much. yeah, my dad and I, we frequently talk about just how much of an issue runoff is, and just how everything, like, all the dirt from the streets and everything just goes back into the water. And then it goes like into our food system, you know, fish. So yeah, that's definitely a really good topic. So great job, guys. So was it honor that? Oh, yes, yeah. Oh. Were you in here this whole time? Oh, here, is this it? Yeah. The other one is this.
So bad over there. I was like, I had to become organized, then I was like, okay, I'm gonna go do this, and stop talking about one thing.
I want a picture with the poster with Melissa.
Okay.
I took some candidates.
I didn't even notice.
Because I was
couldn't
so
see any.
cool about it.
Oh, yeah. I wasn't smiling. I wasn't smiling though.
That's fine. I'm smiling, I'm just really. Do you have this on Google Slide? Or like, did you make it on Google Slide?
I think so, yeah. I did.
Alright, this is fine, I mean.
That's fine.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
You can press for F11 to like get rid of the borders.
Oh, thank you. Sorry, what was it?
F11 or F12.
Oh, right
Oh, right here, right there it is.
That's so
Two heads.
Oh.
Oh, perfect.
Oh,
That helps. That's better. No, perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, no, yeah.
Okay. So we have Marion, this is Marion Artiaga, talking about particulate matter concentration trends before and after wildfire damage. This project investigates the relationship between wildfire damage and particulate matter concentration trends in western United States.
Hi guys. Yeah, so I was looking into this in particular because I thought it was really interesting regarding wildfires and how they're becoming a little bit longer. And we kind of all, I guess I was thinking that because they're becoming more frequent and they're staying a little bit longer than most, I was wondering if maybe because of the environment, depending on where they're at, like if it's a humid environment or like if it's drier, that's the reason that's causing it longer or to stay longer and burn for longer periods of time, as opposed to if it were like a more, I don't want to say like a wetter climate, but the summer would be a little bit shorter. Like I would think somewhere like in northern Washington or eastern Oregon would be a little bit cooler throughout as the seasons change compared to like California, where it gets a little bit drier and it stays drier for longer periods. So as I was looking into it, I realized that there is a little bit of correlation, but I haven't gathered a lot of other places because I want to compare it to other locations, not just the ones where I was focusing on. This is Western United States, so I am looking into Washington, California, and Oregon. But I will also be comparing it to other locations. I was looking into India and like, just for comparison regarding to the weather conditions. But yeah, that's one of the reasons why I was kind of really interested in it. And aside from they're becoming more frequent and staying longer. And so my original hypothesis was the burning of biomass in large scale increases the particulate matter in the air exponentially, affecting air quality in nearby cities. So I was using Purple Air as the main database, aside from other articles, but Purple Air was basically the main source for this experiment or investigation. And I went ahead and used the, if I can go through this, but I used Purple Air, I got the cities, I went ahead and just looked at a time span of 2 months before and 2 months after, and during, and obviously during, and you can see from the graphs over here as they increase. So what I thought was really interesting regarding the two graphs is that the Labor Day fires were in Washington, and then the complex fire was in Northern California. And as you can see in the graphs, there's like a longer, like as if it was like for longer periods compared to like the one in Washington. So I was a little bit curious whether it was like vegetation or if it was just regarding that it was a bigger fire. Both actually had a lot of acreage burned. So I thought maybe it had to do with weather conditions or like environmental factors. But aside from that, I thought that was pretty interesting. There's other locations that have similar, I would say, characteristics in regarding the peaks and also the time frame. So I thought that was pretty neat. And also how this is also part of like what's contributing to aerosol particles in the air and how long they're staying out. But the experiment can't go too much into how the aerosol particle stays, how long it's aging in a sense, because I'm limited with investigative tools. But, yeah, so in regarding to my conclusion, I did see correlation. There's still not enough that I still wanted to continue doing this in regarding like investigating other cities and comparing them. But there is a correlation in regarding the aerosol particle quantities compared to the fire. The peaks here from what it goes, it's still pretty high. But what I really going through this, I realized that I kind of want to also look into why they're staying longer, whether it is the environmental factors that are contributing to that longevity of this fire, or if there are other things, or if it would be like a null hypothesis of it not having any other effect, just data. But yeah, that is part of my future work. I do want to focus on why, if it is specifically for environmental factors, or if it's just, contributing to the aerosol qualities, properties. Yeah, sorry, that is all that I have. Any questions? Yes.
Can you clarify on those graphs
Oh.
when the fire is burning and when the 2 months after that you're measuring?
Oh yeah, so this is actually a 2-month period. So it starts from July 1st to November 30th. And of course there's nothing here, but as soon as the fire starts, you can start seeing the peak and rising, and as it goes through. I saw that this is during like the most time it was burning, and that's why you notice the peaks there. And this one is also a 2-month period within the same time frame. So both start at 7/1, so July 1st, and end at 9/30. So, September 30th. And yeah, so these are the dates, and then this is the PM value of the particle count.
So this includes the time of the fire?
Yes, so those specific were 2 Purple Air monitors in the area that it was nearby. You can't get something that's like specifically there because the fire is so big. You can actually get any monitor that's there. Yeah, so those were 2 within the time frame of the fire. One is in Chico, California, and then for the complex fire, and the other one, it was in nearby Seattle where the Labor Day fires were occurring.
how many miles away?
From the fire, this, can't give you that data. That is a very good question, and I will focus on that. But this was about, I think 50, the town got evacuated, so some towns got evacuated, so I would say about 50 to 60 miles from the nearby surrounding Chico.
And which of those fires had the greater loss of biomass?
The greater loss of biomass, that is another very good question. And I would say, I would not be able to answer that. Can you repeat the question?
Well, your statement up here says it was determined that the large loss of biomass increases the aerosol particles in the air.
Okay, yeah, they came back. So it was the larger fire that did contribute to more aerosol particles in the air. So the complex fire, is that what you're referring to, or?
Maybe I'm confused as to what the conclusion is.
The conclusion is that our initial hypothesis was that there is an increase in aerosol particles based on the longevity of the fire and how much it was burned, so how much of that biomass was burned. So the complex fire was a relatively big fire, and within that time frame, it did produce that amount of, a higher amount of aerosol particles in the air than the Labor Day fires. I hope that answers your question, but I don't know.
So you're saying more burning, greater particles?
Greater particles, yeah, sorry.
Okay. And then did you see anything in the 2 months after when you compared the two?
I did. The interesting thing is that it goes straight down, so it was literally just a couple, it stays within the teens, so like 12, 13s, and so that's a very interesting thing. I don't know if it's not counting that as, or maybe it's limited to the purple air, or how it measures it. So I don't know that specific, I don't have that specific answer, but that is something that I thought was really interesting, because like, how long does it stay in the air? Because it's aging essentially, right? Like eventually it somehow dilutes, breaking down, and as time goes by. So I think that's a really interesting thing to look at. I try to relate it to like the chemical properties that it has and how it ages. But yeah, once I looked into the data 2 months after, it really pretty much looks almost the same. So it was just measuring it as if it wasn't there. So it's literally like, I didn't provide one, but if I were to give you a 2 month graph after the fire, it would start looking like this.
Oh, so that doesn't include 2 months after?
No, it didn't include it on my results, but
Okay.
it did. These are only for 2 months before, but
I see.
I should have provided one.
But
Yes.
these two fires that you were kind of looking at and comparing, was there a large difference, or were they pretty similar in terms of the size of area that the fires covered, and or the length of time that the fire burned before it was put out or
Yeah,
extinguished?
so if I noticed a difference in regards to both of them, or
Yeah, I mean, just how much area did each fire burn, and then how long did they burn? So did one fire last 5 days and the other one was 2 weeks, or is it, like, so?
Yeah, so this one right here was about, I believe a little bit over 8 days or so. Each one of these increments represents a day. But yeah, so this one burned a lot longer than the other Labor Day fire in Washington. And both of them had very similar acreage burned over, I think roughly it went over like 500,000 acres to maybe 800,000 acres. I don't want to say, if you look at it, it's like about 1 million, they say, but I was just going based off what the sources I found, and roughly each one was well over 700 acres burned collectively, or not even more, depending. Because the Labor Day fires goes into Oregon, and so it's kind of like included into that part, but so if I were to provided data for that specific one, that it would include those Labor Day fires with Oregon. So yeah, they roughly went over, I would say, I'm comfortable to say about 700,000 acres.
Thank you so much.
No, yeah, of course. Thank you.
Awesome.
No, thank you. Sorry.
Great job, everyone. That is a conclusion to all of our presentations. Everyone did a really good job. I really enjoyed listening to the presentations, so thank you all so much for putting so much work into this. Yeah, I thought everything was just looked really great, and I definitely learned a lot. That's why I love these conferences. So, yeah, you guys could get more food if you like, or hang out. And thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for moderating.